In this series of podcasts, we're going to cover how to create a hierarchy. Now, we're going to be giving you a hierarchy, and then you're going to replicate it based on a joint chain we give you. So in this case, we have two joint chains. One is actually a joint chain that all the joints are named properly. This is actually a finger system. And then we have this other system we're trying to mimic. We have a bunch of local-oriented controls. They are actually locked and hidden, all the translates and scales. And you'll notice we'll see the padding system here. It's only a single pad. We also have everything named properly in here, so we're going to have to do that eventually too. And then the base root joint has a single local world-oriented pad, whereas this one does not. So pretty much with this joint chain, we need to create a pad for it. We also have to create a series of controls for the first, second, and third joint, make local-oriented pads for them, and then lock and hide and rename everything inside the system. So we're going to break this down into a series of steps. This podcast is going to be going over just identifying what we need to work on and getting that information. And then the next podcast will be covering how to block out that code into what's called pseudocode. And then finally, we're going to fill in the information as it goes along. So let's get started we have our script here by starting off our script. So I have a script called rigging tools. And I'm just going to import this to check to make sure that it's established. Okay. I'm going to clear history and run it. And it says rigging tools active, and that's all I have. I do have import PyMel on here. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a function called hierarchy. And I'm just going to print out hi. And we're going to include a header onto our hierarchy function. It's going to be, we're going to import a rigging tools. Let's indent that over. Actually, I don't have to put reload in here because it's going to be rigging tools dot hierarchy. And that's how we're going to run our script. So I save it. I'm going to bring this last line, rigging tools hierarchy, clear our history and run it. It says hi. Okay, so we've established our function. We have our header, and this is going to explain what we need to work on. And by the end of this podcast, we'll fill out this header. So we're going to say hierarchy created. Right there's our output at the bottom. And now we need to know, what are we going to work on this entire function? Now, to start off with, I'm expecting the user to select our root joint here and then execute our tools. That's it. We're assuming that the hierarchy is going to be named, but we don't have to worry about that now. We're assuming we're going to go through and grab everything we need based upon the user just selecting the root joint chain. Okay. So I'm going to say select root joint chain and execute function. Oops. Just like we have below. And it's going to recreate a given hierarchy. Create based on a given system. Okay, so we got our header. And if I save and run that, we're not going to notice any difference. So I clear and hit play. There goes. Hierarchy created. Now onto our input. So we're going to establish our input area. What are we working on? And that's going to be the root joint. Okay, so how do I get selected items inside of Maya? The ls command, particularly with the selection flag turned on. Okay, this will return what's currently selected. Now, I'm only having the user select the root joint, but I really want it to be the whole joint system. So if I use, along with selected, the DAG flag, this will not only get the root joints, it'll grab all the children joint on top of it. So let's call this joint system. There we go. So let's just check that out. So I'm going to say print joint system and say joint system. Save and run it. Does the user have something selected? It does. I clear and hit play, and it tells us that we have the middle one selected, the middle two selected, and it gets them in order all the way down to the waist joint. Good. So that's what we want to work on. Not quite done yet, because I don't want to work on just joint system here. I can actually comment this out since I know that works. So I'm just going to hit Command and front slash. It'll comment out that line. So I want to isolate the current joints in this system. The first one's going to be the root joint. And that's actually going to be joint system 0. Now I could work on that index throughout the whole thing, but joint system index 0 does not really roll off the tongue. Root joint, we know it's the first joint in our system. Now that's going to work for dealing with this joint when we do the padding, and it's going to deal with the local oriented control for this joint. But what about joint 2 and joint 3? We need to establish those two. Even though at this current point when we work off it, we won't have to actually know them right away, we will eventually need to know the names of those joints. So we're going to say joint 2. That's going to be joint system index 1, which is the second joint. And joint 3. There we go. So at this point, I already printed out the information before, so I know this is correct. If I was being really, really picky, if I was having any issues with these names or anything, I would print it out root joint, joint 2, and joint 3 in the same fashion. So I'm not going to do this right now because I know it is working and I can save it and execute it and see that it's working. But that's always a good method of doing too. Okay, so that's our first phase, just establishing what we're going to be working on. And then the next phase that we're going to be leading into is breaking down our code into just comments, and then filling out our code would be the last stage.